What's up, guys? Paul Revelia coming to you live from Florida Atlantic University with my man Eric Helms.
We're in the same distance from the camera.
I asked if anyone had any questions for Eric because he's really smart, way smarter than me, and so we're gonna do some questions. Some will be funny, some will be informative.
Awesome.
All right, and we'll just get started. Juba HH wants to know, why don't you have a PhD yet?
Because I don't want to get in the way of the fame of Dr. Lane Norton. He needs to be the guy with the PhD.
The PhD guy.
Right.
So if you were to get a PhD,
then I've already got.
Lane's gonna have to go get
and
a
I've also
HHD.
He's leaving.
Bye, Lane.
His ego can't take it. He's leaving.
Here's one. I'd like to hear his thoughts on how intertwined the hypertrophic response is with volume and intensity. Also, could the responses to volume and intensity be dependent on the individual's specific distribution of muscle fiber types?
So I'll answer that in a few parts, since there's a few parts to that question. So we have a pretty strong relationship with hypertrophy and volume. And I would say the relationship with intensity is less clear, but for the most part we know that progressive overload is still king.
Right.
Uh-oh. So doing enough volume and doing progressively more volume over time probably makes the most sense. You don't necessarily have to be training for strength. However, you do want to be getting stronger over time. I think that would, from what we know of the mechanism of hypertrophy, plays some component. I would say there probably is a debate right now over the relationship between strength and hypertrophy.
Sure.
Which makes sense to me because strength is a complex multi-component model. Morphological adaptations, neurological adaptations, the skill component.
Morphological, look it up.
It's changes that include hypertrophy, but are also things like pennation angle changes, intramuscular adaptations that aren't necessarily contractile tissue, and other things that play a role that are actual structural changes to the body that influence strength, right? So hypertrophy is just one small piece of that. So strength is a little more complex. Hypertrophy, I'm confident in saying, does play a role in developing strength in the long run. How much of a role, I think, is up for debate. But I would say they are not the same. I think there's a fair amount of data that shows that you can gain hypertrophy whether you're doing 20 RMs, 30 RMs even, blood flow restriction training.
Here's a question, 1,000-foot view. Is it possible to ever actually answer this question? No matter how much research we do, are we ever going to get to a point where we have an answer, or is it always going to be our best guess? Which, I mean, science basically is anyway.
Yeah, I think that's almost a question for what does science tell you? Science tells you what isn't true, almost, right?
Right.
It eliminates possibilities, null hypothesis testing, right? For the most part. And it can give you certain levels of confidence. So we have terms like null hypothesis testing, confidence limits. It's all probabilistic statements and estimates of magnitude. So we will have a better and better idea over time, but we almost by definition can't have the perfect answer to any question.
Yeah, I realized the fault in my question as I was asking it.
That's right.
But the argument that I hear is intensity versus overall volume, and I think a lot of that comes down to what the individual enjoys doing the most and can be the most consistent with. Yeah. And there's no reason you can't do both.
Yeah, and actually, since it's actually pretty appropriate, we're at Florida Atlantic University right now. This is where Alex Klemp's thesis was done under Dr. Zerdos's guidance, and he actually had a volume-equated study where one group was doing exclusively high reps, and the other group was doing exclusively low reps with a higher intensity. And they actually found in pretty controlled conditions, I've seen the research they do here, it's very top-notch, similar gains, not statistically different gains in strength and hypertrophy, believe it or not. I think some of that had to do with the training age of the participants, but the point is, at least for the hypertrophy
data. Was that one muscle group or whole body?
Both quads and pecs, so bench and squat.
So an upper and a lower.
I think the take home there is that you have a lot more creativity and flexibility as someone training for hypertrophy. In that, if you think you've got to train like a powerlifter, or you've got to do the big three, or you've got to go really heavy, and you're getting beat up and jacked up by that approach, your hips aren't they don't like it, or your joints are beat up from when you used to play sports in college or whatever. You can certainly do lightweight training so long as it's progressive. I think the problem is a lot of time, at least in the bodybuilding community, not in research, the guys who are doing the pump and tone and high rep work, they don't think very progressively.
Right.
They're like, how can I make the overall...
The kind of goal there would be get the best pump.
Right.
Feel like you have pain.
Do an extra drop set. Right? Yeah. So, but I think if you took that approach of, I'm not going to touch anything under 20 RM. I think this would work. It'd be pain in the lungs, and you were to just try to progress, let's say your 15 to 25 RM range, I think you would actually get similar hypertrophy. You would be limited practically, because that's, try to do 25 RM on squats.
I think that's deep enough for you. All right, next question. I'm going to post the name up on there. I'm not going to pronounce him. Coming out with another book. You've covered a lot in the first two, so we're just looking out. Are you coming out with another book anytime soon? For those that aren't familiar with the book they're referring to, I'll link it in my description below.
Yeah, so
the pyramid books.
Yeah. So I did two books based on, and it greatly expanded on the video series I did in 2013 and 2015 on a hierarchy of importance for nutrition and training for both strength and hypertrophy called The Muscle and Strength Pyramids. I will probably not be coming out with a new book on a different topic in the very near future, but we are looking to do a second edition and include some other cool stuff. I'm getting attacked by insects, so we're probably going to do a second edition before I do any new book.
So this isn't a question, I don't think. There's no question mark. So for those of you that are asking questions, use the question mark thing. That helps.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read it as if it was a question. Using plant-based proteins as a bulk of your protein intake, like soy. I'm assuming he's saying, is that okay for hypertrophy?
Yeah, so depending on the source, there's different answers to that. I wouldn't want specifically a ton of soy. Not that we have good long-term data on this, but it does seem to have some, I will say, estrogen-like effects, which isn't always necessarily bad, but I wouldn't want that to be the bulk of your intake. Once or twice a day, that's fine. If you have a high enough protein intake, and you ensure that, say, your branched-chain amino acid content is decently good. Like pea protein actually is pretty good for that.
Do they dose any vegetable proteins with like leucine?
A ton of them, yeah. Okay. So there's a bunch of vegan protein sources that have added branched-chain amino acids, which includes leucine. So you can definitely do it and not have any detriment. Most people don't. You just have to pay a little more attention. You have to make sure your protein intake is high enough. If you're talking close to a gram per pound or higher, it starts making less and less difference, the source. From
my perspective, and Eric can give his thoughts on this, when you're using plant-based sources to get your protein, your calories have to be a lot higher to get the same amount of protein. So that can be a limiting factor in planning a diet.
No, that's very true. Yeah, so I've worked with a couple of vegan bodybuilders, and it's very difficult to cut their carbs down.
As have I, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be high fat, high protein, pretty low carb.
Right, yeah. So you have to end up using more supplements and more powders to do it.
Cool. Breakdance contest.
I win.
You'll definitely beat me. I think Silent Mike is the one that wants to see you dance. He's a pretty good dancer.
Silent Mike, bring it.
Yeah. Word to your Mark Bell.
In the B-boy stance.
The 2-day refeeds. This was something we talked a lot about in Australia, and I have since implemented it. 2-day, 3-day diet breaks. Can you discuss the study where the individual and the sequential refeeds were done, and kind of some of the differences that were seen amongst the participants?
So this is mostly, or at least we can definitively say this is most important for women. But I would say it's probably, it probably has beneficial effects in men.
Okay.
So there was a study where they put, two different studies. They put women through a calorie deficit, pretty aggressive one for a period of time. And then in one group, they had a 1-day very high calorie refeed. We're talking, for an average sized woman, maybe 140 pounds, eating like 4,000 or 5,000 calories, okay? And they looked at hormonal response, so some of their menstrual cycle related hormones. And as women, as you know, and for coaches, you probably know this, it's very common for physique competitors to lose their menstrual cycle if they're not taking oral contraceptives. And this tends to also parallel drops in thyroid and other metabolic hormones, things you don't want to go down. And obviously long-term having no menstrual cycle is not good for bone health, It's actually not good for muscle retention, muscle building, a lot of things. It's not ideal, right? So you know, seeing an uptick in those hormones and a return towards normalcy is a good thing, right? So there was another study where they had roughly maintenance calories after this calorie deficit for 2 days, and in the 1 day study where they had this massive refeed, they did not have much of a change. They did not return to normal. However, when there's 2 days of maintenance, even though it's a similar amount of calories, you saw a restoration leading into like the 36 and 48 hour mark. So what this means, if you think about it kind of in terms of what makes sense for humans, is, you know, we've gone through feasts and famines throughout human history. And not to play armchair, you know, anthropologist here, but it's not uncommon to be like, oh, I found the woolly mammoth, I'm going to eat him, and then there's no more food availability. So it makes sense that the adaptations that would survive are the body starts to return towards a normal energy expenditure, a normal,
sex drive.
What's the word I'm looking for when you have children?
Reproduction.
Yeah, normal reproduction status once you have food availability. But if you only get one meal and it's like you found a lot of food but there's no food availability, the season hasn't changed, you haven't come upon a herd of animals that you're tracking through the plains or whatever, that you're not going to see that return to normal. So there's not only a magnitude of calorie intake that's required, but also a time course.
Sure.
Now, that's not to say a single day refeed is pointless. It would replenish glycogen. It would be a day of not dieting. It's a day you're not circling the drain. But I think it's probably more important earlier in the diet.
And more psychological.
Psychological break, you know. There was actually another cool study. This is unrelated, but tangentially related. They didn't actually follow this diet, but they had a bunch of people rate which one they found more acceptable. And the option was one where they just straight diet all the way through it on 1,500 calories, or the other one where they do 1,300 calories on 6 days and then have a one big refeed day. And more people felt that the 1,300 and then a large refeed day was sustainable. That makes sense. Like 1,300, 1,500 both suck. It's just degrees of suck. Right? But knowing that you have that one big day at the end, for most people, that gives them kind of that light.
For me personally, and for a lot of my clients that I get feedback from, having that carrot at the end of the week, the end of whenever you put it, it makes, in 2 days I get a higher day. And one more day I get my refeed day. And then the refeed day comes and you get to feel good for the day and enjoy some more food, and then it sucks again, but it helps it, you know, because I always say this in my videos, you got to embrace the suck if you want to get shredded. It's too many people want to like easy prep.
And the conditioning standard these days is so high. I mean, people are trying to get to Brian Whitaker level, so it means you've got to diet for a long time, so you have to pay attention to here's sustainability.
Exactly what he's saying. And here's one last question that's going to actually make a lot of sense. Do you maintain a full flexible diet approach through prep, meaning Pop-Tarts, McDonald's, eating out, or do you convert somewhat of a bro-like approach as the show approaches? And if it changes, is it for physical development or psychological reasons?
I think a good way to look at flexible dieting is not that it's getting away with eating junk. A true flexible diet is one that gives you as much flexibility as possible given the constraints of your goal. So full flexible is context specific. So for example, when I've got a competitor who is 4 weeks out, I'm asking them to be within 5 to 10 grams in all their macros. I'm asking that they ensure they get 1 serving of fruits and vegetables per every 1,000 calories they eat. They have to eat at least 20 to 25 grams of fiber per day. And I want to see, you know, some attention paid to the number of meals they eat for energy, sustainability, all that stuff. In the off season, I might get as far away from that in the gradual stages as, hey, I want you to track your 7-day average body weight, hit a protein minimum, and then make sure that you are gaining weight or losing weight at the appropriate rate of what our goals are. So you're basically saying, into the constraints of being 6% body fat, trying to get to 5, being hormonally shut down, doing a bunch of cardio, and your training's suffering from that, you need to pay more attention. It's like you're walking a tightrope when you're 6 weeks out. When you're in the off season, it's like you've got body fat, you've got glycogen, you've got energy to train.
People will actually say, I feel full, I don't want any more food.
They eat smaller pre-workout meals sometimes. Like, I don't notice the difference between 250 and 350 grams of carbs in a day. Some people do, which is fine. So I think looking at like calories and protein, or body weight and protein, and then just getting the right appropriate change, I think that's probably more appropriate in the off season.
Yeah.
You only want to manage as many variables as you need to be optimal.
Yeah.
And it's hard to argue that you need to be within 5 grams of your fat target in the off season, you know?
Exactly. If you're using a flexible diet approach and you're getting ready for, say, a natural bodybuilding show, and you want to win your pro card, or you're competing as a pro, or you just want to get shredded, when macronutrients get low, bro foods are bro foods for a reason.
Yeah,
they
they're more
work.
satiating.
They're more voluminous. They're more satiating. You're going to be able to hit your goals better. You're not going to have the flexibility to what some people think, stick with the Pop-Tarts or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there's a little bit of misconception that flexible dieters don't eat bro foods close to a show.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not risking 24 weeks of dieting to, hey, let's let somebody else prepare my food and just hope that it's what it says on the restaurants.
Exactly.
No,
you're not eating out.
I'm preparing all my own food.
Yeah, you're in control of the situation because you have an extreme goal. Even though we're being as flexible as possible, if you were to tell the average person who is not a bodybuilder the most flexible bodybuilding approach that's still optimal, they'd be like, oh my God, that's incredibly rigid. You have an eating disorder, you know? So
Paulo in Australia said to me, flexible dieting is only flexible if you've been on a meal plan.
Correct.
Flexible dieting is not flexible to somebody that just eats intuitively.
Yeah, flexible is a subjective determination, so it means it's only flexible in relation to something else.
Yes.
If you've never tracked a macro before in your life, me going, hey, you can do whatever you want, just track your protein, carbs, and fat for the rest of your life and weigh everything, they'd be like, oh my God, you're crazy.
Yeah.
But if you tell a bodybuilder who's only eaten 5 foods for 6 months, they can have anything they want to hit their macros and their protein and their vegetable and fruit target.
And that can also be overwhelming.
That can be.
Because they're like, wait, I can have whatever I want. Yeah.
So another thing, just to kind of on that note, a good point, Paul, is if you're going to make a large change to the way you approach things, do it in gradual steps, or it can become mentally overwhelming. And that's true for you coaches as well who are doing that with clients. Yeah.
All right. Well, anything you want to add or anything you're doing in the near future? So we're here at Florida Atlantic University, and you're doing some research. Do you want to just...
Right. So I live in New Zealand. That's where I'm doing my PhD. However, I'm collaborating with Dr. Mike Zerdos here in Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton. I have the absolute pleasure of working with a great team here, and basically what I'm doing is comparing an 8-week training study in well-trained lifters, basically. Doing the bench press and the squat, looking at same number of sets and reps in each group, same pattern of their periodization plan. However, one group is using RPE to dictate their load, and one group is using just percentage of 1RM, so a more traditional format. Trying to see if there's any differences in the stress they experience.
Does that percentage of 1RM change based on anything?
Yeah, so it basically follows like a linear increase over time. So they go from doing, in like the first few weeks, like 8 reps on one day, 6 reps on another day, 4 reps on another. In the end of the study, they're doing 6, 4, and 2, and it's a lot heavier.
Okay, so intensity increases.
Intensity increases, and we have the same rep targets in the RPE group. It's just the RPE goes from like 5 to 7 at the very beginning to like 8 to 10 at the very end.
Awesome. So
we'll be seeing if there's what happens when you let lifters have more control over their progression.
And I think I've seen some of those previous studies where I think actually Mike did one where they were on 3 different levels of intensity. They got to pick the intensity level the first 2 workouts based on how they felt.
Yeah.
And then the third one was, of course, the one that they didn't do yet.
Yep. So they did the flexible nonlinear periodization.
Did you use any of that data to influence how this was set up?
You know, theoretically, because the original data that influenced that study was a study by McNamara in 2010 where they found, not within a week, but within like an entire mesocycle, like 4 weeks. They let, or 3 weeks, I can't remember. They let the participants choose whether they want to do a strength or a hypertrophy day. Or no, basically it was like muscular endurance, hypertrophy, or less hypertrophy. It was like 15, 10, or 20 RM. They had a little more flexibility than the study they did, and they actually found the more flexible group got stronger. That was their rationale.
Nice.
Then the flexible nonlinear periodization was kind of within a week, and it had the same effects as letting them, it's following a structured order. So the concept is there that, hey, you can at least give people more flexibility within a week and they'll be the same, and potentially more flexibility might even be better. But this is, I would say, just giving them control over the loads they lift.
So auto-regulating
intensity
might be better.
We'll see. And
maybe the psychology of the athlete is important?
I would definitely say so. Some people don't do well with RPE, some do great with it.
Right.
Some people are like, barely get it, hit the rack, get a spot, and they're like, that was a 7, you know.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting too. So,
yeah, so
and I'm sure more experienced lifters do better with RPE.
We'll try to find out. So we can do like correlations on what participant characteristics.
How many participants do you have?
We have right now. We've got 24, but we're
12 in each group.
Roughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you to Eric for being on my video, and if you guys have questions or comments, you can post them below. I'll prod him to like get in the comments section and answer them. He's a wealth of knowledge.
You're gonna prod me?
That happens tonight.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's always good to see you.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to be back over in Australia this winter for us, this summer for you, and we'll be doing some more touring around. And good luck with all your studies in Auckland.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon. You know what it is? I think you're afraid of me.
I think it's actually the bugs that are like. I'll just stand here.
Are we in frame?